Evelyn slides the single hotel keycard across the breakfast table. Anna looks at it, then at her mother, then at the name engraved on the sleeve. David and Mark, room 412, last night. David walks in, coffee in hand, smiling like it's any normal morning. Evelyn doesn't look away. Your husband's been fucking my husband for 8 months, darling. Happy anniversary. The mug hits the floor. Anna's wedding ring bites into her finger like it's trying to warn her. 1 keycard, 2 marriages, 0 survivors. Anna, you haven't touched your dinner. David's voice sliced through the dim hum of the kitchen, where the overhead light cast elongated shadows across the oak table, their edges bleeding into the corners like unspoken regrets. Plates sat cooling, the steam long vanished from the mashed potatoes and the overcooked roast, leaving only a faint, greasy chill in the air. Anna stared at her fork, its tines buried in a lump of gravy-soaked meat, as if sheer will could make it disappear into the ether. The clock on the wall ticked relentlessly, each second dragging her deeper into the evening's quiet suffocation. She forced a smile, thin and fragile as cracked porcelain. I'm just not hungry tonight. Long day at the gallery. Her fingers curled around the edge of the tablecloth, the fabric rough and unyielding under her nails, grounding her against the rising tide of unease. David's eyes, steady behind his reading glasses, lingered on her face, searching, always searching for the fissures he pretended not to notice. He was the anchor, the one who paid the mortgage on this 2-story colonial in the suburbs, who coached Little League on weekends and folded laundry with mechanical precision. Stability, he called it. To Anna, it felt like a slow, inexorable drowning. He nodded, pushing his chair back with a scrape that reverberated off the tiled floor, sharp as a withheld accusation. You work too hard. Come on, at least try the peas. His hand reached across, brushing hers, a gesture meant to reassure, but it landed like a heavy stone, pinning her in the moment's wait. She withdrew slowly, excusing herself to the sink, under the pretense of rinsing dishes. Hot water gushed from the faucet, filling the basin with a steamy veil that blurred the window's view of the manicured lawn outside. The world beyond reduced to hazy smears. The scent of dish soap, lemon-sharp and artificial, mingled with the faint metallic tang of the tap, stinging her nostrils. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a low vibration that rattled against the granite like a trapped heartbeat. Anna glanced at David, who had returned to his plate, fork scraping methodically against porcelain. She dried her hands on a towel, the threads worn soft from years of repeated use, and picked up the device. The screen glowed in the low light, illuminating her reflection. Eyes shadowed with exhaustion, lips pressed into a line of quiet desperation. The message was from Mark. No greeting, just words that uncoiled like smoke in her mind. Midnight, the old pier, come alone. We can't wait any longer. Her breath caught, a sharp intake that tasted of salt from the lingering steam, sharp on her tongue. The pier, abandoned since the mill closed, its splintered boards jutting into the murky river like forgotten bones, weathered and rotting under the relentless damp. Excitement flickered first, an illicit spark low in her chest, promising the rush she'd craved since their first stolen conversation at the art exhibit 3 months ago. Mark's voice echoed in her memory, smooth and urgent, whispering of dreams beyond this scripted life. But dread followed, thick and insistent, twisting the spark into something sharper, more perilous. What if David noticed the flush creeping up her neck? What if the meeting unraveled everything, the house, the routines, the fragile peace she'd built around her fears of emptiness? She pocketed the phone, the slim rectangle pressing against her thigh like a secret heartbeat, pulsing with forbidden intent. David's chair creaked as he stood, clearing his plate with a clatter that jarred the silence. "Everything okay?" he asked, pausing at the sink. His tone was even, but Anna caught the undercurrent, the stress etched in the furrows of his brow, the way his shoulders bore the invisible load of bills and unspoken doubts, sagging under the weight. He wanted this to hold, their life as a bulwark against the chaos he'd glimpsed in his own youth, the adventures he'd buried under layers of duty. "Fine," she murmured, turning away. The word hung between them, brittle as the cooling air, fragile enough to shatter at a breath. In the silence that followed, Anna felt the fracture widen, a hairline split in the foundation of their world, creeping inexorably outward. Midnight loomed, pulling her toward the shadows where Mark waited, his yearning a mirror to her own reckless hope. Yet unease settled deep in her gut, a cold coil warning of the cost. The love she chased might leave her more alone than ever. The fork slipped from Anna's numb fingers, clattering against the plate as the kitchen's shadows deepened into night, swallowing the edges of the room. Hours dragged in oppressive silence, the uneaten meal a cold accusation on the table, its congealed remnants mocking her indecision. Sleep evaded her, tangled in threads of unspoken yearning, memories of hidden promises and forbidden escapes coiling tighter in her chest, constricting like vines. By midnight, the melancholy weight of her life pressed like a shroud, igniting a slow, rebellious spark that whispered of clandestine summons and the dread-laced pull of what lay beyond. "It's not just about her anymore, David. Anna's pulling all of us into this mess. And if you don't step in, we'll all drown in the scandal." Evelyn's voice sliced through the confines of the study, her words landing like lead weights on the worn leather armchair where David slumped, the material creaking faintly under his shifting weight. The room smelled of stale pipe tobacco and the faint, acrid tang of old books stacked haphazardly on shelves that bowed under their weight, dust motes drifting lazily in the stale air. A single desk lamp burned low, its amber glow carving harsh angles across Evelyn's face, etching deeper the lines of perpetual disapproval around her mouth. She paced the threadbare Persian rug, her heels sinking into the fibers with each deliberate step, her silk blouse whispering against her skin like a conspirator's secret, soft and insidious. David rubbed his temples, the pressure building behind his eyes like a storm he couldn't outrun, throbbing with relentless intensity. Anna's untouched plate from dinner still haunted him, the way her gaze had drifted, vacant, toward the window as if the world beyond their picket fence held some forbidden promise, pulling at her like an unseen tide. He wanted to shield her from it, to glue the fragments of their life back together with sheer will. But the ache in his chest whispered otherwise, a hollow echo of doubt. Mark lounged against the edge of the desk, arms crossed, his casual posture belying the intensity in his eyes, dark pools that seemed to absorb the light, leaving only deeper shadows. "Scandal," Mark echoed, his tone smooth, almost mocking, laced with that effortless charisma that made David's skin prickle with unease. He straightened slightly, unbuttoning the cuff of his shirt, to reveal a glimpse of tanned forearm, veined and strong, a subtle reminder of vitality. "Evelyn, you're always thinking in terms of ruins. What if this is her way out? Our way out? Anna's suffocating here, same as the rest of us." David's fingers tightened on the armrest, the leather creaking under his grip like a strained confession. He could picture Anna upstairs, alone in their bed, her body curled away from the emptiness that had seeped into their nights, cold and unyielding. Stability, that's what he owed her, owed the kids, the mortgage, the Sunday roasts, all the rituals that bound them. But Mark's presence stirred something buried, a flicker of rebellion that tasted like rust on his tongue, sharp and metallic, corroding his resolve. The man had always been a magnet, drawing people into his orbit with stories of far-off places, reckless nights that ended in dawn's unforgiving light, pale and revealing. David had watched Anna light up around him at those interminable family gatherings, her laughter genuine for once. And now he understood the pull. It wasn't just her fracture. His own cracks were spiderwebbing outward, silent and inevitable. Evelyn whirled on Mark, her necklace, a string of pearls inherited from a grandmother who prized propriety above all, clinking softly against her collarbone, a delicate sound in the tension. "You think you're saving her? You're the poison, Mark, charming your way into her head, whispering about escapes while the rest of us clean up the wreckage. If David doesn't see sense, I'll make sure everyone does, starting with her precious reputation. Mark's lips curved into a half-smile, but his eyes flicked to David, holding there with an intensity that bypassed words, piercing like a held breath. David, come on. Meet me tomorrow. Just us, away from this cage. No agendas, no judgments. Let me show you what she's seeing, what we could all see if we stopped pretending. The invitation hung in the air, thick as the dust motes dancing in the lamplight, swirling lazily. David's pulse thudded in his ears, a slow, insistent rhythm that drowned out Evelyn's sputtering protests, fading into a distant hum. He saw it then, the clandestine spot Mark had mentioned once, a forgotten boathouse on the lake's edge, shrouded in willows that muffled secrets like old confessions, their branches drooping heavy with damp. The thrill coiled in his gut, not for Anna, not entirely, but for the raw edge of it, the rebellion against the man he was supposed to be. Failing them all terrified him, the trust shattering like glass underfoot, sharp and glittering. But this longing? It burned brighter, an impulsive spark igniting the dry tinder of his discontent. He nodded, the motion small, almost imperceptible. But Mark's gaze sharpened in recognition, a silent acknowledgement. "All right," David murmured, the word escaping like a breath he'd held too long, ragged and releasing. Evelyn's face crumpled, her hand flying to her throat, but David didn't look at her. The fracture had begun, a quiet snap in the oppressive silence, pulling him toward the shadowed thrill he could no longer deny. Hours blurred into a suffocating haze after Evelyn's departure, the study's shadows lengthening like accusations David couldn't escape, stretching across the floor in accusatory fingers. Guilt coiled in his chest, heavy as the scandal she invoked, urging him toward the one place he dreaded most, Anna's apartment. The drive through rain-slicked streets dragged on, each mile amplifying the dread that their fragile world teetered on ruin, tires hissing against wet asphalt. As he ascended the dim stairs, muffled voices pierced the door, pulling him inexorably into the storm, the wood creaking under his weight. "Why are you doing this to us, Anna? Haven't you taken enough already?" Evelyn's voice cracked like brittle glass in the dim parlor, her fingers gripping the edge of the velvet settee, as if it were the last tether to her unraveling world, nails digging into the fabric. Anna stood across from her, arms folded tight over her chest, the faint scent of jasmine from her perfume clashing with the musty odor of old books lining the walls, thick and cloying. The room pressed in, walls papered in faded damask that seemed to absorb every syllable, turning the air thick and unyielding, heavy on the lungs. Anna's eyes, wide with a flicker of defiance masking deeper uncertainty, darted toward the floor, avoiding the weight of judgment. "I'm not doing anything to you, Evelyn. This is about Mark and me. Why can't you just let it be?" Evelyn stepped closer, her heels sinking into the plush rug with deliberate weight, each thud echoing softly. "Let it be? You're dismantling everything we've built. Our home, his reputation, yours now too, if you keep chasing this delusion. Do you even see the wreckage you're leaving behind?" The door creaked open behind them, and Mark froze in the threshold, his coat still damp from the hurried walk across the garden path, droplets tracing cold paths down the fabric. He had slipped away from the study moments after Evelyn's tirade, her words about scandal echoing in his skull like a persistent ache, throbbing dully. Now, this, his wife and the woman who ignited something wild and forbidden within him, locked in confrontation. His pulse thudded low and insistent, a betrayal blooming in his chest as guilt coiled around his ribs, squeezing until breath came shallow and labored. Anna turned first, her face softening at the sight of him, hopeful light breaking through her insecurity like a faint dawn. "Mark, you came." Evelyn whirled, her gaze sharpening like a blade honed on resentment. "Of course he came, running to you again, like a moth to your pretty little flame. Tell her, Mark. Tell her how this ends, with all of us exposed, shamed before everyone we know." Mark's throat tightened, the weight of Evelyn's plea pressing against his desperate yearning, a suffocating pressure. He wanted Anna, her laughter and stolen moments, the way she made his discontent dissolve into electric possibility, warm and alive. But here, in the oppressive hush of the parlor, Evelyn's anxiety mirrored his own buried fears. Rejection not just from Anna, but from the life he had manipulated into stability, now fracturing under his shadow, splintering silently. "Evelyn, please," he murmured, stepping inside, the door clicking shut like a verdict, final and echoing. I didn't mean for it to." "Isn't what?" Evelyn interrupted, her voice rising in a controlled tremor, jealousy etching lines around her mouth, deepening with each word. "Isn't destroying us? You've been slipping away for weeks, whispering promises to her while I hold this family together. And you, Anna, pursuing your true love without a thought to the fallout. What happens when he chooses her stability over your chaos? When you're left alone, just as you've always feared." Anna recoiled, her arms dropping as insecurity flooded her features, raw and exposed. She glanced at Mark, seeking reassurance, disregarding the web of consequences spinning tighter around them all. "Mark, say something. Tell her we're real." He opened his mouth, but words tangled in the guilt surging through him. Guilt for Evelyn's hollow eyes, for the family portrait on the mantel that now mocked his duplicity, frozen smiles staring down, for drawing Anna into this peril without shielding her from the stakes, cold and unforgiving. The room's shadows lengthened, furniture looming like silent judges in the dim light, and Mark felt the fracture deepen, a slow tear in the fabric of his world, ripping wider. I can't lose you either," he finally whispered, the admission hanging between them, raw and inadequate, as dread settled like dust over the ruins of their fragile peace. The air in the parlor thickened, heavy with unspoken regrets that clung like shadows to the faded wallpaper, persistent and chilling. Evelyn's plea hung suspended, unanswered, as the weight of Anna's silence pressed down, stirring a fog of confusion in the room's dim corners, murky and disorienting. Minutes stretched into an eternity of unraveling certainties, each breath laced with the dread of truths too fractured to grasp, until the tension coiled tighter, poised to snap. David shoved the parlor door wide, the brass knob slamming against the oak paneling with a dull thud that echoed through the stuffy air, reverberating like a heartbeat. His coat still clung to his shoulders, damp from the evening mist outside, the fabric heavy and cold against his skin, but he ignored it, eyes locking onto the two women frozen in their standoff. Evelyn's knuckles blanched white on the settee, her words hanging unfinished like a noose, while Anna's jasmine scent sharpened, cutting through the room's stale odor of polished wood and fading roses, almost overpowering. "Enough," David barked, his voice rougher than he intended, boots scraping across the Persian rug as he crossed the threshold in 3 strides, the fibers muffling but not silencing his approach. He planted himself between them, chest heaving, the weight of the day's ledgers and unspoken burdens crashing down at once, suffocating. The secret, the one Anna had whispered to him in stolen moments, her hand brushing his under the table at family dinners, warm and illicit, burned in his throat now, a reckless fire he could no longer contain. Evelyn's jealousy, her endless probes into Anna's choices, had twisted everything into this brittle confrontation, and guilt clawed at him like thorns. Every glance from his wife, a reminder of the stability he was shattering, piece by crumbling piece. Anna's eyes widened, her arms unfolding slightly, lips parting in a silent gasp that caught in her throat. "David, what?" He cut her off with a raised hand, the gesture too sharp, too desperate, slicing the air. "You think this is about reputation?" he said, turning first to Evelyn, whose face crumpled in bewilderment, confusion etching her features. "Order? It's not. It's me. I've been the one pulling her away, Evelyn. The late nights, the excuses. It's because I can't stop wanting her." The words tumbled out, raw and unfiltered, a rash flood born from the anxiety that had seeped into every meal, every casual touch around the house, tainting them all. His shadow self, that buried hunger for something wilder than boardrooms and routines, surged forward, trampling his drive to hold the family together, relentless. Evelyn recoiled, her grip slipping from the settee as she staggered back a step, the velvet creasing under her palm like a fresh wound. Confusion etched deep lines across her forehead, her anxious control fracturing into something hollow, echoing inside her. "You... what? David, this isn't... Anna's your..." She choked on the words, eyes darting between them, the protective facade she'd built around their name cracking audibly in her stutter, splintering. The room's oppressive shadows seemed to thicken, pressing against the walls papered in faded damask, where family portraits stared down with painted serenity, indifferent witnesses. Anna froze, her hopeful insecurity blooming into outright disarray, chaotic and overwhelming. She reached out, fingers grazing David's sleeve, but pulled back as if burned by the contact. "David, no, you can't say that here. Not like this." Her voice wavered, the jasmine now cloying, mingling with the faint metallic tang of fierce sweat, sharp in the air. She had chased love's thrill, disregarding the fallout. But this, his confession, dragging their hidden pull into the light, left her adrift, consequences crashing like unseen waves, relentless and cold. David's breath came in shallow bursts, the rashness settling into regret, even as it escalated the chasm between them. He had meant to shield them, to intervene and diffuse Evelyn's accusations. But the emotion had overridden sense, revealing the fracture in his moral armor, jagged and exposed. The family's unaware bliss shattered, replaced by a dread-laced fog that muddled every prior certainty, thick and disorienting. Evelyn sank onto the settee, murmuring denials to herself, while Anna backed toward the window, her reflection ghostly in the glass, pale and wavering. David's hands hung limp at his sides, the parlor's air now thick with unspoken accusations, each heartbeat a slow, inexorable drumbeat toward ruin. Hours blurred into a suffocating haze after the parlor's frozen tableau shattered under unspoken accusations, fragments lingering like shards in the mind. David retreated to the shadowed corners of the house, the mist's chill seeping deeper into his bones than the evening damp, persistent and bone-deep. Sleep evaded him, replaced by a gnawing void that twisted every memory into doubt, corrosive and unrelenting. By dawn's reluctant light, the air grew heavier, the family's fragile equilibrium fracturing as whispers of his erratic fury lingered like smoke, priming the inevitable unraveling. Despair coiled tighter, a slow venom eroding the walls between them, silent but inexorable. The silence splintered under David's gaze, shards of it embedding in the parlor's faded wallpaper like accusations unspoken, sharp and lingering. Anna's hand, still clutching the edge of the settee, released its grip too late, leaving pale crescents on the velvet where her nails had dug in, marks of desperation. The other woman, his sister Eliza, stepped back, her knitting needles clattering to the floor, forgotten in the sudden chill that followed his entrance, the metal ringing faintly. David's coat dripped forgotten water onto the Persian rug, but he didn't notice, his eyes fixed on Anna, unblinking. She stood there, cheeks flushed, not from the hearth's dying embers, but from the secret that pulsed between her ribs, like a second heartbeat, urgent and hidden. Mark lingered in the shadowed alcove beyond the doorway, his presence a ghost David hadn't yet sensed, drawn by the commotion like a moth to the flame he himself had ignited earlier that afternoon, flickering dangerously. "What was that?" David's voice emerged low, not a shout, but a grind, like gravel under boot heels, rough and scraping. He shrugged off the coat, letting it slump to the floor in a sodden heap, his shoulders squaring as if bracing for a blow, muscles tensing. The room's air thickened with the scent of overbrewed tea and beeswax polish, every breath a reminder of the life he'd built here. Stable, predictable, a fortress against the chaos outside, now cracking at the seams. Anna swallowed, the motion visible in the hollow of her throat, a subtle tremor. Hope flickered in her chest, fragile as a match head, urging her toward Mark's hidden promise of escape, of love unburdened by duty, warm yet elusive. But insecurity coiled tighter, whispering of solitude if she faltered now, a cold whisper in her ear. "Nothing, David, just talking." Her words hung, thin and unconvincing, as Eliza gathered her needles with trembling haste, murmuring excuses about the kitchen, her voice fading. He crossed the room in 3 deliberate strides, the floorboards creaking under his weight, each groan amplifying the dread that seeped into Anna's bones, chilling her core. Up close, his face was a map of strain, lines etched deeper around his eyes, the responsible mask cracking under the stress of ledgers unbalanced, and nights spent alone while she slipped away, silent departures. "You've been distant, snapping at the children this morning, staring out windows like the world's ended. Eliza says you've been like this for weeks." His hand reached for hers, but she pulled back instinctively, the motion betraying her more than any lie, a flinch in the dim light. In the alcove, Mark shifted, his breath shallow, desperation carving hollows in his yearning, deepening the shadows on his face. He wanted to burst in, claim her, drag her from this suffocating tableau. But manipulation stirred, urging him to wait, to let the seeds of doubt take root and weaken David's hold, patient and insidious. His fingers curled against the doorframe, nails biting wood, as Anna's fear of rejection mirrored his own, binding them in silent complicity, unseen threads. David's eyes narrowed, suspicion blooming like ink in water, spreading dark and irreversible. "Is there someone else? Tell me, Anna, for the family's sake." The question landed heavy, a stone in her gut, guilt surging as she thought of Mark's touch that afternoon. The stolen moments that disregarded the wreckage left behind, warm yet destructive. Her shadow self, reckless in pursuit of happiness, warred with the anxiety now flooding every glance at the family portraits on the wall. Smiling faces oblivious to the fracture widening beneath, frozen in false joy. She opened her mouth, but only a whisper escaped. "No." The lie tasted of ash, despair settling like dust over her hopes, the oppressive weight of it pressing down until the room felt too small for breath, air thinning. David turned away, shoulders slumping, but the doubt lingered, a crack in the foundation that no amount of stability could mend, widening silently. Mark watched from the shadows, his manipulative hunger sated for now, even as the family's unraveling fed his own desperate escape. The hearth popped once, sharply, and the melancholic hush returned, heavier than before. That night, the parlor's shadows lengthened into the small hours, the air thick with unspoken fractures that clawed at Anna's chest, persistent and aching. David's gaze lingered in her mind like a bruise, the family's crumbling veil pressing down until dread coiled tighter than her fingers on the settee, unyielding. Sleep eluded her, replaced by a hollow resolve. With the facade irreparably torn, she slipped from the house into the oppressive dark, drawn inexorably toward the one embrace that would shatter everything. Footsteps fading into the night. Mark's voice cracked through the parlor like a whip on dry leather. "What's all this?" He stood in the archway, shirt untucked from a restless evening upstairs, eyes darting from David's rigid stance to Anna's flushed cheeks, then to Eliza's crouched form retrieving her needles. The interruption sliced the moment in two, forcing breaths where none had been drawn, ragged and uneven. Evelyn swept in behind him, her skirt whispering against the threshold, a tray of untouched tea balanced in her hands, as if order could be served on porcelain, fragile and precarious. She set it down with deliberate care on the sideboard, the clink of cups a fragile counterpoint to the thickening quiet, delicate chimes in the tension. "David? Eliza mentioned you'd returned early. Is everything all right?" Her tone wrapped concern around an undercurrent of command, her gaze lingering on Anna a beat too long, sharpening with that unspoken envy. The way her daughter moved through life unburdened, choices blooming like weeds in a garden Evelyn had long ago weeded bare, thorny and wild. David forced a nod, his throat constricting as he met Evelyn's eyes, the motion tight. Stability. That's what he owed them, this fragile lattice of routines and unspoken pacts, woven thin. But the weight pressed harder now. Anna's presence across the room, a magnet pulling at the cracks in his resolve, insistent. "Just a long day at the office," he said, voice steady despite the storm churning beneath, roiling. Mark hovered closer, his desperation etched in the way he positioned himself nearer to Anna. As if proximity could claim what eluded him, her regard, her escape from this stifling house, warm yet distant. "Anna, you look upset," Mark ventured, his words laced with a hunger he couldn't mask. Fingers flexing at his sides, as if to reach out, to manipulate the moment into something yielding. Subtle tension. Anna slipped toward the doorway, murmuring an excuse about fatigue, her departure leaving a void that Evelyn filled with brisk efficiency, the air shifting. "We'll discuss it at dinner tomorrow. No need for dramatics tonight." She turned to David, her hand brushing his arm. A gesture of possession, not affection. Her anxiety flickering in the tight line of her mouth, lips pressed thin. Losing control terrified her. The family's polished surface marred by whatever shadows danced in Anna's wake, elusive and dark. David felt it all, the guilt coiling like smoke in his lungs, the thrill of his hidden yearning clawing for air, desperate. Mark watched him too, suspicion narrowing his eyes, that manipulative glint surfacing as he probed. "Father, you seem off. Something at work, or—" The evening dragged into hours, the house settling into its nocturnal creaks, floors groaning under unseen steps, shadows pooling in corners like spilled ink, viscous and spreading. David lay beside Evelyn, her breathing even in sleep, a barrier of propriety that no longer held, thin as paper. Guilt gnawed deeper with every family glance exchanged earlier. Mark's yearning plea for connection, Evelyn's vigilant grip on decorum, unyielding. The facade unraveled thread by thread, anxiety seeping into every word, every averted gaze, corrosive. He couldn't bear it. Not tonight. Slipping from the bed, sheets whispering his betrayal, soft as a sigh, David padded down the hall. Anna's door loomed, a threshold etched with dread, heavy in the dimness. He paused, hand on the knob, the irrevocable pull winning out, magnetic. The latch clicked softly, and he stepped inside, the door sealing shut behind him, a quiet finality. Her form stirred in the dimness, eyes widening in silent question, surprise flickering. But he crossed the room without a word, sliding beside her on the narrow bed. Their bodies aligned in the darkness, a line crossed in the oppressive hush, fate's knot tightening with the first shared breath, warm and forbidden. Tension hummed between them, electric and unrelenting, as the house slumbered on, oblivious to the fracture widening at its heart, slow and deep. 3 days had crawled by since that fractured evening, the parlor's shadows lingering like unspoken accusations in Eliza's mind, persistent specters. Sleep came in fits, haunted by the echo of Mark's voice and the heat of stolen glances, each one a thread unraveling her composure, fraying edges. The house pressed in, its walls heavy with secrets, as paranoia seeped into her every breath, insidious and choking. Then, on a gray afternoon, the post arrived. A plain envelope, unmarked, its weight promising revelations that twisted her gut with fresh dread. Paper crinkling faintly. Someone knows. Mark's pulse throbs in his temples as he fumbles the envelope from his coat pocket, the wax seal already cracked like a fragile eggshell under his thumb, brittle remnants flaking. 3 days since that tangle in the parlor shadows, Anna's breath hot against his neck, David's oblivious cough from the hall, Eliza's needles clattering like distant accusations, sharp echoes. He shouldn't have come here, to this cramped tea room on the edge of town, where the steam from chipped porcelain mugs curls upward in lazy spirals, carrying the bitter tang of oversteeped leaves, acrid and lingering. But Anna's note had pulled him, a hasty scrawl promising clarity, escape, urgent ink. She sits across the scarred oak table now, her fingers twisting the frayed edge of a napkin, eyes downcast but flickering with that insecure hope he both craves and resents, a conflicted light. "Mark, we can't keep pretending," she murmurs, voice barely rising above the low murmur of other patrons. Widows in faded lace, their whispers a dull hum like insects trapped in amber, persistent buzz. Her drive pulses beneath the words, that blind pursuit of something real, consequences be damned, reckless fire. He wants to reach for her hand, to weave the lie that binds them tighter, but his shadow stirs, manipulative tendrils urging him to twist her yearning into his salvation, subtle coils. The door chimes, sharp as a blade, and Evelyn sweeps in, her heels clicking against the worn floorboards with the precision of a metronome, rhythmic and unyielding. She's early, or has she followed? Her coat, buttoned to the throat, clings like a second skin, and her gaze locks on them immediately, anxious control etching lines around her mouth, deepening furrows. "Mark," she says, voice clipped, sliding into the seat beside Anna without invitation. The air thickens, not with revelation yet, but with the weight of her presence, her jealousy coiling like smoke from the unlit pipe on the next table, hazy and suffocating. She doesn't know, can't know, but her eyes dart to Anna's flushed neck, the faint bruise hidden under powder, and Mark's stomach knots, twisting. "I was just leaving," Anna stammers, rising halfway, her insecurity cracking through like fault lines in porcelain, fragile fissures. She glances at him, pleading silently for rescue, for the love she chases without seeing the ruins it leaves, desperate eyes. "Sit," Evelyn commands, her hand pressing Anna's wrist down, not hard, but insistent. A mother's grip masking the venom of envy. Firm pressure. "We're all family here, aren't we? Or close enough." Her smile doesn't reach her eyes, that deep-seated shadow flaring as she eyes Anna's choices. The freedom Evelyn both despises and secretly envies, a bitter undercurrent. Mark's fingers crush the envelope in his pocket, the paper crinkling like dry bones, faint snaps. He pulls it out under the table's edge, away from their scrutiny, and slits it open with a thumbnail, edge scraping. The words bleed across the page in spidery ink. Her sighs in the dark, the parlor rug beneath you both, David's shadow in the hall. End it, or everyone learns. Intimate, precise, a stranger's knife carving into his facade, cold steel. His breath catches, paranoia flooding in like ink spilled across a white page, dark and spreading. Who? Eliza, with her watchful eyes? David, nursing some buried slight? The letters blur as Evelyn leans forward, her perfume, cloying lavender, invading his space, overpowering. "What's that?" she asks, voice laced with suspicion, her fear of humiliation sharpening every syllable, edged. "Nothing," he lies, shoving the note deeper into his pocket, but his voice wavers, the mask fracturing, cracks showing. Anna's gaze meets his, hopeful still, blind to the dread pooling in his chest, heavy weight. Evelyn's control tightens, her fingers drumming once, twice on the table, a rhythm that echoes his fracturing resolve, steady taps. The tea room's walls close in, the clink of spoons against saucers a mocking pulse, metallic rings, and Mark realizes the escape he yearns for is slipping, paranoia rooting him in place as the shadows lengthen, encroaching. 3 days later, the envelope's fractured secrets lingered like a stain on Mark's soul, each sleepless night deepening the melancholic dread that choked his every breath, constricting throat. Suspicion festered, twisting memories of Anna's warmth into threads of deceit, the parlor's shadows now omnipresent in his fractured mind, ever-present gloom. Drawn inexorably toward confrontation, he ventured into the gathering twilight, the air heavy with unspoken peril, unaware of the silhouette merging with the oppressive gloom nearby. Indistinct form, that's when Evelyn realized the letter wasn't a mistake. It was a fracture, deliberate and widening, a deliberate tear. The words inside had clawed their way into her thoughts over the past 3 days, ever since that stolen hour in the parlor's dim corners, Anna's whispers coiling like smoke around her resolve. David's footsteps echoing from the hallway like unanswered questions, and the faint clink of Eliza's sewing needles downstairs, stitching normalcy over the chaos, futile threads. She spotted Anna first, across the narrow cobblestone alley behind the apothecary, where the air carried the sharp tang of damp stone and crushed herbs from the shop's overflowing bins, pungent and earthy. Anna stood hunched over a crate of wilted lavender, her fingers stained purple, as if she'd been trying to bury secrets in the petals, faded blooms. Evelyn's heart stuttered, a dull ache blooming behind her ribs, throbbing. She had to end this now, before the poison spread further, insidious spread. Clutching the crumpled envelope in her fist, the paper edges softened from endless rereads, worn thin. She crossed the alley in 3 measured strides, her boots scraping against the uneven ground, gritty sounds. "Anna," Evelyn said, her voice low but edged, like a blade half-drawn, steel glint. She thrust the letter forward, the broken wax seal flaking onto the crate, red flecks. "This, from you? Or someone playing at your game?" Anna straightened slowly, her eyes, those wide, unguarded pools that had once pulled Evelyn under, flickering with something raw, unfiltered, vulnerable depths. She wiped her hands on her apron, leaving streaks of color like bruises, smeared. "Evelyn, what are you—" Her gaze darted to the letter, recognition dawning like a shadow crossing her face, darkening. She stepped closer, voice dropping to a murmur, intimate. "I didn't send that. You know I wouldn't, not after everything." But Evelyn's pulse hammered, suspicion threading through her veins like cold wire, taut and chilling. Anna's denial rang too smooth, too practiced, and beneath it lurked that familiar disregard, the way Anna always chased the thrill, without glancing back at the wreckage, heedless path. Evelyn's mind raced to David's face that morning, his restless pacing in the kitchen, the unspoken weight in his questions about her errands, heavy implications. Had he seen? Did this letter come from him? A quiet unraveling of their fragile peace? Her fear coiled tighter, public eyes turning, whispers carving her into the villain, control slipping from her grasp like sand, grain by grain. David emerged then from the apothecary's side door, a small parcel under his arm. Laudanum for Eliza's headaches, he'd said earlier. But now his presence felt like an intrusion, his torn expression mirroring her own conflict, conflicted lines. "Evelyn? Anna?" His voice cracked on the names, restless energy making his shoulders twitch, unsteady. He glanced between them, the parcel forgotten in his grip, fingers tightening. "What's this about?" Evelyn's breath caught. She wanted to shield him, to weave back the facade of their steady life, but the words stuck, lodged deep. Anna's eyes pleaded, anxious and shadowed by her own terror of isolation. Yet Evelyn saw the fracture. Anna's choices, bold and unapologetic, mocking her own hidden jealousies, sharp mirrors. "It's nothing," Evelyn lied, but her hand trembled on the letter, betraying her, slight shake. David's gaze sharpened, suspicion blooming in the furrow of his brow, his hidden cravings for something wilder surfacing in the tension of his stance, coiled. A scuff of gravel pulled her attention sideways. In the mouth of the alley, half swallowed by the overhang of a sagging awning, a figure lingered, tall, indistinct, collar turned up against nothing but secrecy, shrouded. Not moving, just watching, the glint of eyes catching the faint light from a distant lantern, cold spark. Evelyn's skin prickled, the air thickened with unspoken threats. Who? David's ally? A stranger with their ruin in hand? The figure didn't advance, but its presence pressed like a thumb on a bruise, amplifying the dread that their world was already splintering beyond repair, irreparable cracks. Anna followed her stare, her face paling. "Evelyn, we need to—" But Evelyn backed away, the letter crumpling fully in her fist, the mask of composure cracking under the weight of eyes, known and unknown, bearing down, unrelenting pressure. As the days blurred into a haze of shadowed glances and stifled breaths, Evelyn's secrets festered like an untreated wound, her every stolen glance at the letter deepening the chasm between her and David, widening void. His eyes, once warm, now lingered with a quiet accusation, the air in their home thickening with unspoken doubts, heavy fog. Fear coiled in her chest, a slow, unrelenting pressure, as she sensed the invisible threads tightening around her unraveling world, constricting. The faint clink of sewing needles from downstairs pierced the quiet, dragging Anna back to that afternoon in the parlor 3 days ago. Evelyn's letter clutched in her fist, its ink bleeding accusations, Anna's breath hot against her neck, promising escape from the gray routine, while David's shadow lingered just beyond the door, oblivious yet, elongated form. She blinked, the memory dissolving into the dim glow of the bedside lamp, soft amber. Her fingers curled around the edge of the duvet, the fabric worn thin from years of restless nights, frayed edges. David moved in the hallway now, his footsteps deliberate, heavier than usual, each one a muffled accusation against the oak floorboards, thudding. Anna's heart stuttered, a cold knot forming low in her stomach, tightening. She had dismissed the letter as a cruel joke, Evelyn's meddling from across the ocean, but the words, "I saw you with him, the lies you weave," had festered, coloring every glance David spared her, tainted hues. He entered the bedroom without knocking, his face etched with lines that hadn't been there last week, deepened furrows. Torn, restless, he carried a small black box in his palm, its lens glinting like a predator's eye, cold metal. "Just a nanny cam," he said, voice low, avoiding her gaze as he knelt by the dresser. "For the kids' room. Eliza's been forgetful lately." But his hands betrayed him, steady yet hurried, positioning it behind a vase of wilting lilies, angled toward the door, petals drooping. Suspicion had bloomed in him slowly, fed by late nights she blamed on work, the unexplained perfume on her coat. Marks, sharp and citrus-laced, clinging like guilt, persistent scent. Anna sat up, the sheets pooling around her waist, her pulse a frantic drum in her ears, pounding. Conflicted, anxious, she wanted to reach for him, to confess the pull towards sacrifice, the understanding that love demanded more than stolen moments, raw truth. But her shadow whispered otherwise. Disregard the fallout, chase the thrill. "David, what's this really about?" Her voice cracked, thin as the space between them, fragile gap. He straightened, wiping his palms on his jeans, eyes finally meeting hers, stormy, searching for the adventure he craved beyond their boxed life, yet terrified of the fracture it might bring his family, turbulent depths. "Nothing, just peace of mind." The lie hung, unspoken desires bubbling beneath, simmering. He turned away, but not before she saw the restlessness in his shoulders, the fear of losing her trust, their trust, to whatever ghost haunted their home, ethereal presence. Downstairs, the front door creaked open. Mark. He shouldn't be here, not now, but his manipulative vulnerability drew him like a moth, needing her reassurance, overriding the genuine ache in his chest with calculated charm, dual pull. Anna froze as his voice drifted up, casual, probing. "Anna? You home? David around?" The camera's unblinking eye captured it all. David's subtle stiffening, the way he edged toward the window, peering down at the driveway where Mark's car idled, headlights cutting through the dusk, pale beams. Fear coiled tighter in her chest, Dread's fingers squeezing her lungs, vice-like. This was the fracture widening, the chance encounter in their own threshold, Mark's presence shattering the facade she'd built, brick by brittle brick, crumbling. David's hand hovered near his phone, as if weighing a call, his shadow self yearning for the chaos that might finally balance his hidden hungers, tempted. Anna's mouth went dry. Being alone, unloved, loomed like an abyss, yawning void. Mark's footsteps ascended now, oblivious to the trap clicking into place, his drive to grasp consequences blinded by the need not to be cast aside. Ascending creaks. She rose, legs unsteady, the oppressive weight of the room pressing in, the faint scent of David's aftershave mingling with the lily's decay, cloying rot, the slow tick of the clock marking her unraveling, steady rhythm. "Mark, wait," she called softly, descending. But the words dissolved into silence. The mask cracked, exposure inevitable, and in its shards, only the hollow echo of what they'd lost, resounding. The memory dissolved into the oppressive hush of the evening, 3 days stretching like a noose around Anna's throat, tightening slowly. Downstairs, the needles clinked on, a relentless reminder of the routine she both craved and despised, metallic pings. Guilt coiled tighter in her gut, a melancholic dread that painted every shadow with accusation, dark strokes. Cornered by the bleeding ink of secrets and David's unwitting presence, she steeled herself to sever the thread. Yet the pull of forbidden warmth whispered refusal, promising ruin if she dared. Seductive lure. The faint metallic tang of blood lingered on David's split lip, where he'd bitten it during the drive home. Coppery bite. He stood in the dim alcove off the kitchen, the linoleum cool and unyielding beneath his shoes. Slick chill. While Evelyn's gaze pinned him from across the scarred oak table. Mark slouched against the counter, arms crossed, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on his elbow. A habit that betrayed the storm churning behind his casual smirk. Subtle taps. "You think I wouldn't find out?" Evelyn's voice sliced through the hush, low and frayed, like thread unraveling from a seam, pulling apart. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles blanching, the wedding band glinting dully under the single bulb's jaundiced glow, harsh yellow. 3 days since her letter to Anna, since the whispers of escape that David had overheard but never fully grasped. Now, the pieces clattered into place, heavy as the cast-iron skillet still cooling on the stove, residual heat fading. David swallowed, the knot in his throat sharpening. "Evelyn, it's not—" But the words dissolved, guilt coiling in his gut like rusted wire, twisting. He'd come here to end it, to sever the thrill that Mark's touch ignited, the reckless pull away from this suffocating routine of suppers and silences, binding chains. His family, Evelyn, the kids upstairs pretending not to hear, deserved better than his shadows, dark veils. Yet as he met her eyes, red-rimmed and unyielding, the confession clawed its way out. "I met him at that conference last spring. It started as nothing, a drink. Then, more. I thought I could keep it buried, but it ate at me. Every night, lying here beside you, I felt it hollowing me out." Mark's drumming stopped. He pushed off the counter, his shadow stretching long across the floor, invading the space between them, encroaching. "Buried? That's rich, David." His tone dripped with that familiar edge, manipulative silk over vulnerability, eyes narrowing as if weighing the cost of exposure, calculating. "You don't get to just walk away because the wife's found her spine. We've built something. Nights you begged for. Escapes from this." He gestured vaguely at the peeling wallpaper, the faint scent of boiled cabbage clinging to the air from dinner, sour remnant. "If you end it, I tell her everything. The hotel receipts, the texts. Hell, I'll shout it from the rooftop if I have to. You think losing her trust is bad? Try the whole town knowing what you crave." Evelyn's breath hitched, a sharp intake that echoed in the confined space, ragged. She rose slowly, chair scraping like a withheld scream, harsh drag, her face a mask of conflict, defensive walls cracking under the weight of jealousy. Not just toward Anna's phantom freedoms, but this betrayal twisting like a knife in her own insecurities, deep cut. "You both here? In our home?" Her voice trembled, but she held David's gaze, demanding the full unraveling, unblinking. The air thickened with the unspoken. Her fear of the whispers that would follow, the control slipping from her grasp like sand, elusive. David's pulse thudded in his ears, each beat a reminder of the mundane life he'd nearly shattered for fleeting fire, pounding reminder. Guilt flooded him, cold and viscous, pooling in his chest as he saw the fracture in Evelyn's eyes. The trust he'd eroded, drop by corrosive drop, silent erosion. Mark's threat hung there, a noose tightening, forcing him to confront the adventure he'd chased, now poisoned, tainted. He reached for her hand, but she recoiled, the rejection a fresh wound, stinging. "I want to stop," he whispered, voice breaking. For us. Please. Mark laughed. A hollow sound that reverberated off the cabinets, echoing empty, but his eyes betrayed the fear beneath. Abandonment's chill seeping in. Cold draft. Too late for please. The kitchen clock ticked onward, relentless, as the truth sprawled bare between them, a chasm widening with every labored breath, deepening abyss. Days blurred into a suffocating haze after the confrontation, the weight of Evelyn's unspoken accusations pressing like damp rot against David's chest, musty decay. Nights stretched endlessly, his mind replaying Mark's drumming fingers, each tap echoing the fracture in his resolve, persistent rhythm. Despair coiled tighter, a cold serpent in his gut, whispering of one last chance to reclaim the forbidden warmth, slithering temptation. In the shadowed hours before dawn, fear yielded to weakness. He slipped from the house, keys trembling in his palm, drawn inexorably toward the secret rendezvous that promised both solace and ruin, magnetic pull. The echo of footsteps that never quite followed him into the night. Mark paused at the back door, key halfway turned. The kitchen's yellow light spilling like diluted bile across the threshold, sickly glow. Evelyn's voice had cracked on his name moments ago, sharp as a fault line. But now? Nothing. No pursuit, no plea. Just the hollow where her trust used to anchor him. Empty space. He slipped out anyway, the cool latch clicking shut behind him like a sealed confession. Final snap. The alley behind their row house smelled of damp brick and forgotten trash, the kind of scent that clung without mercy, cloying rot. His phone buzzed once in his pocket. Anna's signal, urgent and unignorable, vibration insistent. Weakness pulled him forward, a tide he couldn't outrun, fear gnawing at the edges of his resolve, teeth-like. What harm in one more talk? To gauge the damage, to twist it back into something salvageable. He told himself that as he rounded the corner to the shadowed lot where her car idled, headlights dimmed to slits, faint beams. Anna stepped out before he reached her, her silhouette fracturing the faint glow from a distant street lamp. Broken lines. "Mark," she whispered, but her eyes darted past him, anxious flickers betraying the disregard she'd always worn like a second skin. Veiled. She moved closer, hands reaching for his coat, but he held back, the air between them thick with unspoken concessions. Heavy veil. "We can't keep doing this," he said, voice low, probing for the fracture points, testing. Vulnerable now, yes, but he shaped the words to draw her in, to make her see the web he'd spun for all their sakes. Woven threads. "Evelyn suspects. I need to know. Will you wait? Understand the stakes?" Her laugh came brittle, edged with the anxiety that twisted her features. Sharp crack. "Wait? While you play house? Love isn't a ledger, Mark. It's not about your sacrifices or mine." She pressed against him, breath warm on his neck, but her fingers dug in too hard, a plea masked as demand, gripping. The argument ignited there, in the gravel crunch under their shifting feet. Her accusations of cowardice, his deflections laced with half-truths about loyalty and loss. Words tumbled, heated and unraveling, her voice rising until it scraped the night raw, harsh edges. "You think I don't see it? You're terrified she'll leave, so you dangle me like a threat to keep her close." He grabbed her wrist, manipulative instinct surging over the vulnerability cracking beneath, iron grip. "That's not—" The back door banged open then, a violent punctuation, slamming echo. Evelyn stood framed in the spill of light, her face pale and etched with the conflict that had simmered since the table, lines deepening. She'd followed the silence, pieced together the absence. "Anna?" The name escaped her like a wound reopening, jealousy flaring hot in her eyes despite the drive to hold the family intact, burning. She stepped forward, defensive walls crumbling into raw exposure, vulnerable. "How long? Tell me it's not what I think." Anna froze, pulling free from Mark's grasp, her anxiety blooming into wide-eyed panic. The fear of solitude crashing down, overwhelming wave. Mark's stomach hollowed, rejection's shadow looming as Evelyn's gaze bored into him, demanding the spill, piercing. No escape now. The truth clawed up his throat, unbidden in the oppressive press of their stares, choking. "It started 6 months ago," he confessed, the words leaching color from the world, draining. "I didn't mean, God, Evelyn, I was lost, trying to feel something real. But it tore everything." His voice broke, manipulative poise shattering into genuine torment. The consequences he'd chased, now a vice around his chest, crushing. Betrayal's depths unfolded in the stuttered details. The stolen nights, the lies woven to shield them all. Each revelation a blade twisting deeper, sharp turns. Evelyn's hands clenched at her sides, not trembling, but steady in their fury. The humiliation she'd dreaded now public in this forsaken lot. Exposed, raw. "You both disregarded us. Me." Her voice wavered. Conflicted support for their fractured unit, warring with the jealousy that poisoned her core. Internal storm. Anna turned away, shoulders hunching against the unloved void yawning before her. Sacrifice's lesson hitting like a delayed blow. Heavy impact. Despair settled then, heavy as the gravel beneath their feet, binding them in its melancholic grip, unyielding weight. No words could mend the rift, only the slow bleed of what they'd lost, dripping away. The weight of Evelyn's unspoken fracture clung to Mark like damp rot as he slipped into the car. The engine's low growl a futile barrier against the night's chokehold, rumbling low. Betrayal coiled in his chest, a slow venom leaching through his veins, urging him toward the one place he shouldn't go, the lover's shadowed apartment across the rain-slicked divide of the city. Each mile blurred the hollow ache into a sharper dread, the dashboard glow etching his resolve in flickering half-light, wavering illumination. Outside, the low growl of a neighbor's dog, chained and forgotten. Inside, Evelyn's breath, ragged as torn silk, filling the kitchen like smoke, hazy veil. David froze at the sink, the faucet still dripping in uneven plinks against porcelain, persistent drips. Evelyn stood across the linoleum, her arms crossed tight over her chest, eyes like chipped flint, hard and unyielding. Anna lingered by the fridge, a shadow in the corner, her fingers twisting the hem of her blouse. The air tasted metallic, like blood on the tongue, though nothing had spilled yet, anticipatory tang. "You think I wouldn't notice?" Evelyn's voice sliced low, not a shout, but a blade drawn slow, deliberate edge. She stepped forward, her slippers whispering against the floor. "The late nights, the way you look at her. Anna, my sister." "God, David, how long?" David's throat closed. He wanted to bolt, to chase that hollow freedom he'd tasted in stolen moments with Anna. The thrill of her laugh in the dim light of motel rooms, far from this suffocating routine, echoing joy. But Evelyn's gaze pinned him, her face a map of fractures. The lines around her mouth deepening, her knuckles whitening. She was fighting now, not just him, but the jealousy that gnawed her, the envy of Anna's careless freedom, the life Evelyn had buried under duty and family, suppressed depths. Anna shifted, her voice a thin thread. "Evelyn, please, it wasn't—" "Shut up." Evelyn whirled, her hands slashing the air. The words tumbled from David then, unbidden, a confession rotting inside him for months, festering, her anxiety fractured open. Alone, unloved, the consequences of a reckless pull on David crashing down like a wave she couldn't outrun. Crashing roar. David's world tilted. "Anna!" He dropped to his knees beside her, hands hovering, afraid to touch, trembling. The injury stared back, accidental but irrevocable, a red accusation on her pale skin, glaring. Evelyn backed away, hands to her mouth, horror dawning in her eyes. She'd meant to strike out, to reclaim control, but this violence born of her shadows, humiliated her, stripped her bare, exposed core. "We have to fix this." David's voice cracked, restless energy surging as he grabbed a dish towel, pressing it to Anna's wound. Blood seeped through the fabric, staining his fingers. Warm spread. Cover it up. Lie. The family, his trust with them, hung by this thread now, fraying. Anna whimpered, her free hand grasping his wrist, a plea for understanding she hadn't earned. Desperate hold. Evelyn watched, silent, the melancholic weight of shattered vows pressing down. Dread, thickening the room, until breath came hard, labored. He helped Anna stand, her legs unsteady, and,